Today, instead of talking about Peter the rock, as we often do, I thought to talk about something much more basic, which is how do we know that Christianity is the true religion in the first place? Of course, this is a big question and requires hours of conversation. But I'm going to take a bird's eye view so that I can summarize everything. And the reason I'm going through this is because I know that ultimately the best faith is faith, a blind faith, you might say. But faith itself is not blind. Faith is a light. But it requires first to enter into faith to have reason. Why are you believing this? And then once you come into a personal relationship with God and you trust, then you can have blind faith because you trust 100%. Peter said in his letter, "Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give reason for the hope that you have." So if somebody asks us why we believe certain things, we should know and answer them because that answer will help them. So this is my approach, and I hope you find it helpful to you. Let's first begin with, how do we know anything about God in the first place? We know about God in two ways. The first way is called natural revelation. That is, we look at everything around us and we can know that God exists. Just as if you take a book and read it, you can tell something about the author of the book. Or if you look at a painting, then you can tell something about the artist that did that painting. So the way the universe is, as we study it, we can see that it's extremely fine-tuned for life to exist. The way that it is has logic built into it. And the way mathematics are discoverable within it, its very fabric. The way nature emits beauty everywhere, all come together to show there must be a creator who is uncreated, who is all-powerful and all-knowing, to bring about such an amazing creation. Looking further, you realize that there has to be more to life than just living and dying. There has to be a meaning to life. People go through life and they seek answers for things because it's built into them. So we can conclude that there must be a God because there has to be something more. This is the natural revelation, God revealing himself through his creation. The second way is called supernatural revelation, because in this way, God himself reveals himself into the world, in history, in a way that we can never discover by looking around. It's directly God revealing himself to human beings. And we know of these revelations through the stories of the Old Testament, which records everything. God's revelations and dealings with people over the course of thousands of years. In doing so, God established successive agreements or relationships or covenants that began with just a couple and increased to the whole world. So it began with Adam and Eve, our first parents, and then continued on with Noah and his family, and then continued with Abraham and his clan, and then later with his sons Isaac and Jacob and his 12 sons, and later with Moses and the entire Hebrew nation, and then later with David and the kingdom. And over the course of time, enough human beings matured psychologically and socially and spiritually, just enough for his final revelation in Jesus Christ, where now a new covenant was established between the Father and Christ. And now everyone is welcome to come into relationship in Christ and union in him to participate in this covenant. So it spread to the whole world. As we can see, there is a historical progression of God's dealings in humanity. Of course, you can doubt and say, no, this is just make-believe. This is just the Jewish people telling stories to give themselves power, and that's why these stories are perpetuated. But there are two problems with this kind of thinking. First, as you read the Old Testament, you see God constantly criticizing his people, and his people constantly falling into sin and doing the exact wrong thing with God, the exact opposite of what he's commanding. And then you see God constantly warning them and finally saying to them, if you keep this up, you're going to lose your land. And certainly they lose their land. The northern kingdom falls to the Assyrians, the southern kingdom falls to the Babylonians, and the temple is destroyed. If you want to write a story to make your own people proud, you don't write stories like this. You write all the good things, and then you kind of bury the bad things, as all the nations do today in their histories. The second problem with thinking that way is that there were prophets who made predictions about a coming Messiah, and their prophecies came true to a stunning detail. For example, the prophet Isaiah says, "Behold, your God will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind will be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame will leap like a deer, and the mute tongue will shout for joy." And this is just one of hundreds of prophecies in the Old Testament, all focused on one person who is to come. As a matter of fact, Jesus himself repeatedly stated that the prophet spoke of him, and he told the apostles about the fulfillments, and this is the reason that they should believe in him. He reprimanded the Pharisees, saying, "If you believed Moses, you would believe me, for it was about me that he spoke." All four Gospels are filled with stories of Jesus fulfilling one prophecy after another. His divine identity, his teachings, his miracles, his suffering, his death, his resurrection, his ascension to the throne of God. All foretold hundreds of years before. So the Old Testament and the New Testament are inseparable because they're connected in this way through prophecy. And those prophecies are fulfilled, all of them. How we know that the New Testament is true requires a study by itself. In summary, the New Testament writings range from just 20 years after Christ with the earliest letters of Paul to 35 to 45 years with the Gospels of Mark, Matthew, and Luke, and then 55 years or so later with the Gospel of John. Now, I'm 66 years old. I can easily remember things from 45, 50 years ago and write about them clearly. Those are the things that affected me deeply in my life. And the reason I remember them is because I think about them often through my life. Those of you who are young might think that 20, 30, 50 years is a long time. But as you get older, you realize, no, it's not a long time, and that you do remember things that really touched you. because you replay them in your mind from time to time. When you study the four Gospels, you see that they are written like eyewitness accounts as well. In court, if the witnesses recount a story using the same words, and you're on the jury, you're going to say, they conspired together, or somebody coached them what to say. Or if they tell a story that is different, very different from each other, you're not going to know what to believe. But if their stories have slight nuances of variation, but is essentially the same, then you know that you have real eyewitnesses here and that their testimony can be trusted. In addition to that, there are also other writings that are not in the Bible that back up the Gospels. For example, the letter of Clement, who was the third Pope of Rome. He lived at the time of the apostles themselves. He wrote to the Corinthians while they were alive, as well as others who lived during their time, and also right after them, like Ignatius of Antioch, who was martyred in the year 110. The bishops that were ordained by the apostles knew what writings were authentic and what were made up. So there were many writings, and some were written by heretical people that made up stories. But it wasn't hard for the bishops to know which of those writings are authentic, which are not, because those were the bishops that were ordained by the apostles, and they received the writings that they wrote. And so this is how we know that what we have is reliable. We also know that the existing manuscripts, copies that we have, are reliable. That is, the actual surviving books and fragments are an incredible 99.5% consistent, far greater than any other manuscript in ancient times that we rely on for world history. There are also non-Christian writings mentioning Jesus, such as those of Flavius Josephus, a well-known Jewish historian who wrote around the same time as John the Apostle and who mentioned Jesus. So there are only three main religions today that speak of God revealing himself historically: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Christ fulfills the Old Testament, but Islam does not fulfill the New Testament. Rather, it contradicts it. Now, there are other religions that speak of God's revelation, but those don't have witnesses or historical prophecies by the hundreds that coalesce together to be fulfilled in one man who does many miracles incredible that no human being can do, and that died and rose from the dead. And there are witnesses of his life and his teaching and of his resurrection. There's nothing like that anywhere in the world. So Christianity must be the one and only true faith. It is not a philosophy that people choose to follow for how they live. It's not a myth or a magic to manipulate things, but rather it can be proved historically, having reliable eyewitnesses concerning Christ who lived among us. And it continues to prove itself through the martyrdom and through the lives of the saints. So reasoning like this helps introduce us to faith. But for faith to move us, it must become a personal relationship with God. What I told you about is a simple introduction. Now it is about growing deeper in this relationship with God. And once it is, we rely on the foundation of logic, once we rely on the foundations of logic and move on further to have a stronger foundation of love, now this brings us into the very heart and mystery of a living faith, which we all desire and which we are all called to.